Hi, I'm Miriam Cates and this is GBN Originals. In recent years, we've witnessed a seismic shift in the landscape of gender equality. The latest report from the Centre for Social Justice reveals a startling reversal of the gender pay gap, with young women now out-earning their male counterparts. But we must ask ourselves, is this truly a victory for equality? Or are we witnessing the unfolding of a profound crisis among our nation's young men? The findings of the CSJ's Lost Boys report paints a grim picture of the challenges facing boys and young men in the UK. From the moment they step into primary school, our education system is failing them. By the end of their first year, while 75% of girls achieve their expected outcomes, just 60% of boys reach the same benchmark. This disparity persists throughout their educational journey, culminating in a significant gap at university level, where female undergraduates outnumber males by a ratio of 3 to 2. But the crisis doesn't end with education. The transition from school to employment or training has become a difficult path for many young men. The number of 16 to 24-year-old males not in education, employment or training has surged by 40% since the pandemic, compared to a mere 7% increase among young women. Mental health issues are now the fastest growing cause of economic inactivity among young men, a trend that should alarm us all. The economic consequences of this crisis are dire. In a nation already grappling with an ageing and increasingly unwell population, we simply can't afford to lose the vital contributions of young men in their prime. The decline of traditionally male-dominated industries such as manufacturing and agriculture and construction has left a gaping void in employment opportunities for young men without university degrees. Since 1997, we've witnessed a staggering 40% reduction in men working in manufacturing, equating to the loss of over 1.3 million jobs. As these stable, well-paid and meaningful roles vanish, young men are left adrift, struggling to find their place in the workforce and achieve the financial security and status that they crave. Last night, I spoke with former BBC presenter Roger Bolton and Patrick Christys. Let's take a listen.
Do you think it's fair to say then that boys are at the back of the queue and that this is a result of a push for, I don't know, what would you say, gender equality, diversity, whatever you think?
Well, yes, it does seem to be that boys are at the back of the queue. And I think that the results from our study are really quite alarming. Boys falling behind girls even before they even start school. So 75% of girls are what we call school ready, just 60% of boys. And I think the real problem is that disparity is growing and growing. And as I've already said, as you move through schools, boys get worse results. And then even in university now, 2/3 of undergraduates are women. And if you look at the professions that used to be predominantly male, you could absolutely argue for gender equality, but 2/3 of medical students, for example, are women, 2/3 of law students. So things have changed very, very rapidly. Now, you might say, well, why does that matter? And of course, there's no reason at all why women shouldn't have equal opportunities in education and employment. But when you have a whole generation of working age, fighting age men who are disenfranchised, hopeless, don't have a chance at finding employment, and therefore have less chance of finding a partner and becoming a father, that is a problem for the whole of society, not just the young men involved.
Yeah, Roger, what's your take on this report that's come out then? And do you think that there's a chance that a generation of young boys, now maybe young men, have been brought up with this notion that they are in some way inherently toxic and full of privilege, and actually we're now seeing that play out, which is that more of them have screwed their lives up?
No. I think what you've got here is a very good report for the Centre of Social Justice, which does really good and interesting things, though it admits itself that it doesn't yet know the causes of the problem it's identified. What it doesn't justify is your statement that has gender equality left boys behind. What it identifies is a consistent record of girls doing better than boys educationally. But when you look at the statistics for example, whether women are paid more than men, there's still a big gender gap, which varies between 11.3%, women are getting paid less than men, 11.3%, to 7% if you believe another source. If you look at the number of businesses run by women, it's only 15%. The idea that you advantage or deal with this problem with young men by disenfranchising women or holding them back is a quite extraordinary notion. It's one thing to analyse the problem, another thing to say, hold back women who are still disadvantaged because boys are not doing too well.
So neither of those things is the report saying, and do we believe? So first of all, there is a so-called gender pay gap amongst people over 25. And that is purely the result of women who have children tend to take time out of a career and therefore earn less while they're working not at all or part-time, and therefore tend to go back in different professions, different grades by choice. Okay, there isn't an objective pay gap because it's illegal to pay a man and a woman different amounts of the same job. But what we're saying is for the first time ever in the emerging generation, so that's 18 to 25, for the first time ever, so this is men and women working full-time before they've had children, men are working less. So that's significant. Secondly,
hold on. Let me answer that point. You're absolutely right.
One at a time, guys. Sorry, we'll let Roger in, Miriam, and I'll come back to you. Sorry, go on, Roger.
You're absolutely right, of course, in your figures about the under 25s, but over 25, of course, there's still a massive gap. And one of the reasons why women are still disadvantaged significantly is because there isn't proper childcare, paid for, isn't sufficient childcare, and whatever. The danger of what you're doing is to suggest that women are in some way specially advantaged, and that the gender equality, the push for a greater gender equality, has resulted in boys being pushed back. The problem with boys has gone on for much longer. The educational problem has gone on for much longer.
Yeah, but Roger, it does seem. Roger, can I just come in here, because it does seem like every single other class and type of human being, other than predominantly your working class white boy, has had some form of leg up recently. And then why do you think suicide is the single biggest killer of men under the age of 40? Roger, I mean, is there not something going badly wrong there, and maybe life's attitude towards those people?
Well, I think that if you look at that may be, I don't know this, right, but I'm just suggesting something. It may be that suicide among boys and men have been higher proportionately, or virtually always been higher. I think there's a serious problem there. There's a massive problem with why men are, 95% or more of people in jail are men. There's a real problem with white working class boys, and one of the key problems identified by the report and Centre for Social Justice is fatherlessness. The fathers aren't there.
Another critical factor in this crisis is the alarming rise in fatherlessness. Nearly half of British children now experience parental separation, and 2/3 of young men agree that growing up without a father is a leading cause of behavioural problems. The absence of strong male role models is contributing to a wider crisis of masculinity in Britain today. Boys raised without fathers are significantly more likely to end up in prison, face poorer economic outcomes, and perpetuate the cycle of becoming absent fathers themselves. Society's shifting attitudes towards masculinity have only exacerbated this crisis. More than 4 in 10 people believe that traditional masculine values such as courage, resilience, and competitiveness are no longer valued by society. At the same time, many young men feel unfairly portrayed as weak or pathetic in the media, leading to a deep crisis in male self-esteem. When masculinity is frequently labelled as toxic or problematic, is it any wonder that so many boys struggle to envision a positive path to manhood? The consequences of this crisis are far-reaching and deeply concerning. Young men are disproportionately represented among those excluded from school, and many find themselves pushed into crime or incarceration. The undermining of traditional masculinity in recent years has left a void that many young men desperately need to be filled. They crave guidance on how to channel their energy and emotions constructively. Without appropriate outlets for their frustrations, many feel hopeless and disenfranchised. Some turn to violence, others to extreme pornography and misogynistic online communities. Many retreat into the almost exclusively male world of online gaming. Most tragically, suicide has become the leading cause of death among young men. The CSJ's polling reveals widespread concern about the plight of young men. A significant majority, nearly 56%, believes the school system is failing to nurture this generation of boys. This concern is even more pronounced among those aged 18 to 24, with 66% of young men and 64% of young women believing the education system is not adequately serving boys. More than half of the public believe that addressing fatherlessness would greatly benefit society, a view held even more strongly by young men, 2/3 of whom agree with that. The sentiment that boys are being let down by society resonates across the country. Policy Director for the Centre for Social Justice, Ed Davies, spoke to GB News. Let's have a listen.
This makes sad reading this report. What is happening to these boys? When does it start to happen to them?
Yeah, you're right. It does make sad reading. It's quite a compendium of statistics, this report, and it starts early. So from the very first day at school, boys are likely to be quite considerably behind. It's interesting, Keir Starmer's 75% school-ready target. He wants 75% of children to be ready for school on their first day. And the reality is 75% of girls are, but only 60% of boys are. So it starts early, and then after that, it's similar throughout schooling. Boys will do worse in their GCSEs, they will do worse at A-level, they will do worse in T-levels, they will be less likely to go to university and do worse at university and be less likely to then get in the job market. So it is quite a serious compendium of statistics.
This is a time when we thought that in England, I emphasise England, we've been doing rather better in schools. Our international scores in things like maths, arithmetic, English, these had been rising for some time. Yeah. So this decline in the performance of boys comes at a time when actually our education system was doing a little bit better.
So yeah, and a lot of that is being carried by girls. So girls are doing well in the education system, particularly compared to boys. And what you're seeing is this sort of distance between them is now growing. So when you get up to A-levels now, girls will likely do about 1.5 grades per A-level better than boys will do, meaning that their prospects in the job market will be much better. And I suppose coming back to that point on the pay gap, in some ways, the pay gap itself is not an issue. It's what the pay gap indicates. And what it indicates is that journey up into the world of work is going very badly for boys at the moment.
There's a stunning number of young men, young males, who are not in education, employment or training. What is that number, or what is that proportion now?
So yes, it is about 500,000 now who are between 16 and 24 who are not in education, employment or training. It's about 1 in 7 young men compared to about 1 in 10 young women. So that's gone up quite steeply. And the proportion of those men has been going up for 20 or 30 years. And the reasons are complex as well. So the decline of traditional manufacturing jobs will certainly be part of that.
Yes.
But also we've just talked about the education statistics. And actually, if you're in a competitive market and you haven't got the qualifications, then you're less likely to get a job, which is why it sort of matters right the way down to that first day at primary school to ask what is going on with boys here.
Now, how do you make this connection with fatherlessness? Because presumably as many girls are fatherless as boys.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we have found is that there is this huge rise of fatherlessness in the UK, and it is quite hard to talk about as well. But the reality is, I'm in my mid-40s, hard though I'm sure it is to believe. In the mid-1970s, about 90% of 16-year-olds lived with their mum and dad, and it's now about 50-50. So there's been this huge change.
Huge.
And most of those lone parent households are mothers rather than fathers, so it tends to be the father that's absent. And you're right, that will affect boys and girls. But the difference for boys is it is that first role model in their life. It is what that looks like to be a man. And so we talk about things like Andrew Tate as being a real problem. Actually, Andrew Tate is a sort of symptom of the fact that a boy now is more likely to have a smartphone than a father at home. And so, each day as they go out to school, are they being told by their father, you are loved, you belong here, go out, win the day, work hard, or are they watching an Andrew Tate video? And what we're seeing is as that change has come during a boy's lifetime, more and more we're seeing the rise of this sort of feeling that there is something wrong because boys are not being fathered.
Is this the crusty view of my generation, looking down on this situation and saying this is caused by fatherlessness?
Yeah, so we were quite concerned about that. So we polled the general public, and then particularly we polled young men. And what we found fascinating was it is that group under 24 who are most concerned about fatherlessness. So about half the general public said, yes, this is a major problem. But in that young male group, it's about 2/3. And the reason, straightforwardly being, is they've seen it. It is part of their experience. They have grown up like that. Whereas I say, my generation, actually, most of us were lucky enough to grow up in fairly stable households. But that is not the case now.
Were you able to do any work, I think the answer is probably not, about the degree of fatherlessness? I mean, there will be many cases where the father is still in touch with the family. There'll be other cases where the father is not at all in touch.
Yeah.
Were you able to refine that?
So it's really hard to do. What we can say is that increasingly the father is not even present at birth. And actually, we have the worst statistics in Europe for that. We are the most sort of fragile and complex families in Europe. And that's, again, is this sort of a crusty conservative view. That was a study actually done by the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It has a financial impact. It has an equality impact. It is a very real thing we're experiencing. So it is more serious. It is important to say that simply not living with your father is not some sort of death sentence. Like, plenty of children will do really well. This is not a judgment. But when you have this number of children not having regular contact with a father figure, it doesn't just affect your family, but actually you have whole communities where there are not male role models. And that's where you see things as well like gang crime coming in. You see boys being pulled into gangs because they can see charismatic male figures who will sort of give them hope in a way. And it's a sort of perverted hope, but it's a hope that they can be something, belong somewhere, make something of their life that they're maybe not seeing at home or their neighbour's home, or even at school where there are so few male teachers now.
Did your report look into ethnicity at all? We've seen in previous reports that Southeast Asian families, South Asian families, tend to do disproportionately well.
Yeah, so the report looks at boys in the whole, but what you do see is in different areas of life, different ethnicities do differently. So very famously in education, white working class boys do very badly. And that has been talked about quite a bit before. But as you say, particularly Chinese, Asian, Indian families, even children on free school meals tend to do better than the average. Again, though, when we look at what's going on in those families, they put a very high value on family structure, stability and education. Those things are very important in those communities. So in other areas of the report, we're looking at things like crime. So actually in crime, there's a disproportionate number of black boys in prison at the moment and in trouble with the police. So there are differences in ethnicities in different areas, but largely the problem we're looking at is around boys.
A sad problem, that's what we said at the beginning. Any solutions?
So, well, this is the first stage. We're going to be doing this over the next couple of years. What we wanted to do today was put out this mass of statistics to say we've got a problem here. I think it's still a problem that people don't like to talk about. So we thought the first step has to be recognising we have one. And then over the next 2 years, we're going to be looking at a number of different areas, looking for solutions, looking at employment, fatherlessness, education, the criminal justice system, male suicide being a real problem at the moment, the biggest killer of men under 50 still. So we'll be looking at these things in periods over the next 2 years.
For example, I was stunned by the statistic about not in education, employment or training. I thought it was more or less compulsory for people to be one of those. What's changed there? How are these people slipping in such huge numbers through the net?
Yeah, I mean, one of the other stories that's coming out today actually is about changes to sickness benefit. And we're seeing a really large number of young men fall into long-term sickness. Young people and mental health is one of the drivers of increasing sickness benefit, and men within that are a really significant portion. But again, when you come back and look at some of the drivers of this, you will find some of the things, poor education, low family stability, things like that will be part of that problem.
It may give you some satisfaction. I see that your report has really got a lot of publicity. There's a lot of talk about it in the press. Congratulations on the work that you've done, even though it's highlighting a problem that we just wish were not there. Thank you very much.
We can no longer afford to ignore our lost boys. For too long, society has pursued a narrow definition of equality at the expense of addressing the very real needs of young men. The prevailing narrative has often painted men as the problem, labelling them as toxic or problematic, while failing to offer a positive vision of masculinity. We must recognise that men and women are biologically and psychologically different, with distinct wants and needs. Status, for instance, is crucial for men, with a strong correlation between male status and life expectancy. Yet over recent decades, we've steadily eroded traditional routes to status for millions of men. Meaningful work, marriage, fatherhood, and the chance to earn respect by taking responsibility to provide for and protect their families. The crisis facing Britain's young men is not just a matter of statistics or policy debates. It's a human tragedy unfolding before our eyes, with far-reaching consequences for our society and economy. We must act now to provide our boys with the support, guidance and opportunities they desperately need. This isn't about pitting men against women or rolling back progress on gender equality. It's about recognising that true equality means addressing the unique challenges faced by both genders. We need to reimagine our education system to better engage and support boys, creating an environment where they can thrive alongside their female peers. We must invest in vocational training and apprenticeship programmes that offer viable career paths for young men who may not pursue university education. We should promote positive male role models in schools and communities and the media, showcasing examples of healthy masculinity. Addressing the crisis of fatherlessness is crucial. We need policies that support and encourage fathers to remain actively involved in their children's lives, even when relationships break down. More importantly, we must change the narrative around masculinity. Instead of demonising traditional masculine traits, we should celebrate the positive aspects of masculinity while encouraging emotional intelligence and empathy. The crisis of Britain's lost boys is not insurmountable, but it does require concerted action. By acknowledging the unique challenges faced by young men and working together to address them, we can create a society where both boys and girls have the opportunity to reach their full potential. The future of our nation depends on it. Too many of Britain's boys are lost. For the sake of all of our futures, we must find a way to save them. Thank you for watching. This has been Miriam Cates. Don't forget to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel for the latest updates.